I want to dig a little deeper on some of these things in a second, but first, another thing that sort of is, I guess, puzzling in this debate is, and I think Indico is, I guess, an example of it too. How is it, if it isn't magic, in a sense, a magic in sort of like colloquial sense, that a small-ish startup, and you as an example, there are other startups obviously in AI, can manage to beat these massive juggernauts, whether it's, famous IBM, famous because it's easy to beat on IBM, because they're so big and have been around, so it's like a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, how is this even possible that you can? I mean, is it the more clever use of existing tools? Is it some clever access to data that corporations or otherwise have given to you? Or is it that there are still some tricks in the trade that do require a little bit of feel for the game, or something that you just have to stumble upon that isn't just building block upon building block? Because I would sort of like assume, and again, I'm embellishing it a little bit, but here's IBM. They've been doing all of this. They have thousands of people engaged in this activity. Why is it that they can't build rock upon rock and then just really just blow you guys out of the ballpark any day they want?
It's an absolutely great question. And, I think I'm going to start by saying that, yes, Indico has done this, but to your point, we're far from the only ones, right? I mean, you look at Clarify, right? I mean, you look at Alien, right? And everywhere you look, kind of the world is dotted with these really impressive companies doing real significant work in the ML space. And to your point, as an outsider looking at this, you're like, okay, Google has invested billions of dollars into an industry research lab. And how is it possible that, Joe Schmo in his bedroom, and some of these people are literally Joe Schmo in their bedroom, right? I mean, that's how we started this space. We were Joe Schmo in a dorm room, can actually contribute to this space. And I think that the key is that people, because they don't spend a lot of time in academia, they misunderstand the nature of academic exploration. Right. I think people often have this notion, sometimes I joke, it's the old man jumping out of a bathtub shouting Eureka, right? That there's some fixed list of problems, right? And then you're going to check them off and then somehow everything, right? But especially in AI, especially in a space that is very early on, actually research does not work like that. So basically every paper that you put out is going to ask two more questions. Right? And you've got this interesting thing where sort of the frontier of research is expanding outward broadly in kind of all directions. And that means the surface area that you can kind of devote yourself to make real significant improvements is also increasing. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. I actually often like to tell companies there is no better time for a startup that is trying to make a real technical advantage to start their ML journey than today. And I will also say that the other thing that allows these small companies to have so much success relative to investment is that the problem is fundamentally a system level problem, right? If you ask what are, these massive companies really, really good at, is where it is one block ahead of the other and, very linear path to improvement, they can execute like crazy on that. And I don't care whether it's Google or IBM or Microsoft or Amazon, they are going to win. Right, if I had to compete on the economics of marginal S3 capacity, not a chance, right? But because so much of AI today is not just about model infrastructure, right? It's about how are you going to supervise it, right? How are you going to actually get the infrastructure working behind the scenes? And the truth, the ugly truth is, frankly, that academics hate to work on these problems. And academics are so honored today that you can't get an academic to work on something that they don't want to work on. And so it means that there's kind of this very big blind spot where they're always going to have the best architectures. But even within their own organizations, believe it or not, it's very easy for a small company like ours to look at research that their labs are publishing. And because of their internal processes, we may have it in production before they do. Maybe even months or years before they do. Which again, I think it really goes to say a lot more about the space than anything.
It was so interesting to me, unless I misunderstand you, but you're characterizing big tech companies in the same vein as academic labs, in the sense that you're saying they have this, they're basically burdened with the same kinds of problems because of their size and their interest in the generic nature of the problem, that anybody really from the outside who can pick up the pieces and execute faster and more creatively, I guess, has a shot right now at this very moment. Perhaps, though, it is a temporary advantage, right?
I think 100%. In fact, I'd kind of go a step further and just say that, and I also will say, I think this is unique to AI as a space. Most academic spaces I don't think work like this, but there is so much open publishing and the space moves so quickly that, the era of trying to have some proprietary advantage that you guard, it's gone, right? Because the duration of a state-of-the-art algorithm today is months, right? Again, companies, lifetimes are measured in years and decades. So, either if you think you've got a proprietary advantage, either you're mistaken and you're missing some research that someone else out there is doing, or you have 6 months to live.
And then, Slater, what might be the reason that so many of these startups are kind of, I guess, allowed to exist for quite a long time? Is that because this only serves the big tech ecosystem to have all these startups out there, and it's not really a threat because you could sort of pick them off the ground anytime you want, and it's just you need all that variety to make this sort of even incremental progress that I guess many of us are interested in, and some of us fear, right? This is sort of a progress that would take us somewhere really, which we'll get to in a second, somewhere really far beyond where we are right now, which I guess is kind of a little bit our discussion as well. Where are we at this moment in AI, and are we heading into a winter, a summer, a spring, or whatever season you might fancy?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, and I think honestly, your initial take is pretty spot on. I think that for all of the progress that has been made, and this is something that, I don't know, either I've gotten more cynical or realistic over the years, but I used to think in individual years. Now I think in terms of decades, right? So the adoption is certainly going very, very well, but we're still in sort of the first decade of adoption of most of these techniques. And I think it is exactly that, right? I think that, Google and anyone that really understands this space realizes that there's too much ground to cover for individuals, right? And I think certainly their plan is they're just going to look at all of these seeds and, they're going to see what pops up. I think one thing that's also, though, really interesting is when you look at a lot of the ecosystem players like NVIDIA. And NVIDIA obviously is... Did you know that NVIDIA has a 50% higher market cap than Intel today? I was shocked. I did not believe that.
It's an extremely interesting company that would take an entire podcast to explore for sure.
No, so they have one technique in particular, just where they invest heavily into the ecosystem, and they don't want anyone to be acquired, and they just want to sell GPUs. So,
well, in fact, I've been looking at their startup lab. Basically, I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's gotten quite some attention because they literally have this ecosystem approach to startups. As long as you are interested in broadly working in the direction that, or not even, I guess, using their platform, but everybody at some point will be using their platform, right? So they just
absolutely
want the 1,000 flowers to bloom, essentially.
And NVIDIA has really done a lot for the community. I think there's a couple of huge players that I think have, without them, this AI renaissance would not have happened. And NVIDIA is absolutely one of them. In fact, NVIDIA is probably the only one that managed to successfully capitalize on their position. I think Kaggle, for instance, is another, but, NVIDIA actually made an incredibly successful business and continues to do so, whereas Kaggle, they did a comparable amount of good in just educating the world of data scientists out there, but, obviously a very different commercial outcome.